the snowy owls I started studying in 2014, and they were interesting because they are a bird that migrates to the province in winter. So because I could study flickers during the summer, I wanted a bird that gave me an excuse to study in winter, and snowy owls were big and charismatic. So I started a project with some grad students. We put satellite transmitters on a few owls, and that's been the focus of our snowy owl work, is to track their movements in winter. This is a really large, charismatic bird of prey, the snowy owl. This one has a lot of dark barring on it, so it's a female. It's a young female. The older male owls are pure white. And you can tell the difference between the sexes also. Females are actually larger than males, which is opposite to most other birds. So that's an interesting feature of their biology. So when I started studying these, my students and I were interested how they set up territories in the winter, and whether the larger and stronger females were dominant over the males and took the best quality winter territories. So we did a lot of observations of aggression between male and female owls out in winter on the prairie landscape. And then another question we wanted to know is how they migrate from their breeding grounds in the high Arctic to flying down to Saskatchewan in wintertime. And then to track that movement, we needed to use satellite transmitters. So those are really expensive, but we put them on about 24 snowy owls. And because they were solar powered, they last many years. So now we are still tracking a number of old snowy owls that give us data every year about their breeding grounds in the Arctic, and then the tracks that they use to come down back to the Saskatoon area in winter. Unlike flickers that have quite a short lifespan, these birds might only live maybe 3 or 4 years on average, not much longer. Snowy owls can probably live 20 or more years, so much longer, but they don't breed every year. In the Arctic, they only breed when there are lots of lemmings around, and you might have heard how lemmings cycle. About every 4 or 5 years, there's peaks of lemmings. So owls, snowy owls, their main food is lemmings, and they have to wait around for a good year when there's enough lemmings to breed. So they might only maybe breed every 3 years during a lemming peak. And especially in the East Coast, there might be eruptions of snowy owls. So in a good lemming year, if the production of young owls is really good, a lot of those juveniles come south, and then you see peak numbers of owls in places that you don't normally see them in winter. But here in Saskatchewan, it's a little bit different. So we get owls every year in fairly good numbers. Some years there's a few more owls than others, and those might be those peak lemming years with more juvenile owls coming. But we do see, this seems to be a regular wintering area for snowy owls. One of the best places, in fact, to see an owl is in Saskatchewan or Alberta in the winter on the prairies. Snowy owls obviously are adapted for cold. Many owls have quite good adaptations for cold weather, but the snowy owl has especially dense feathers on its feet. You can see that it has heavy feathering down to its toes that provide good insulation. It has really dense bristles around its eyes and around its bill to prevent heat loss from escaping through its face. And it also has a long migration distance. So it's opposite from most birds that leave Saskatchewan in winter to travel south to get to warm places. But the snowy owl comes south from the Arctic and ends up spending winters in a fairly cold place like Saskatchewan, but there's lots of food here in the agricultural landscapes and it's well adapted to cold. So it doesn't seem to mind to hang out at all in a fairly cold winter area. The snowy owl was recently listed as vulnerable internationally on the red list of species, mostly because of threats due to climate change. People are unsure of how it's going to affect their Arctic breeding habitat. So very little research has been done on their breeding biology in the high Arctic. It's hard to get up there to study them, but more and more we're learning that the Arctic ecology is changing very rapidly, and this could have ecosystem effects on the lemmings and then on the snowy owls. So we don't know whether their migration timing is going to change, whether their frequency of reproduction is going to change. So hopefully by putting transmitters and monitoring them over more of a longer time scale, we can start to understand about shifting behavior as the Arctic warms in the coming decades. Both the flicker and the snowy owl have quite large clutch sizes. The flicker can lay up to 12 eggs, and snowy owls also can, in a really peak lemming year, have 10 or so eggs. But the number of eggs that they lay depends a lot on how many lemmings there are. And the young chick snowy owls are hatched asynchronously. So that means some of the first eggs hatch, and then those chicks start to grow bigger, and then the other eggs may hatch over a span of a week or more. So you get some older chicks and some smaller, younger chicks at the same time. And then if the lemmings crash or the food crashes, the younger chicks die. And it sounds kind of tragic and sad, but it's a special adaptation to ensure that there's at least enough food left to rear the older chicks. So the female at least will have a partial brood and be able to rear some chicks, rather than if there was suddenly a whole bunch of chicks, she wouldn't be able to feed any of them and they all would starve. So that's a unique breeding feature of snowy owls. Well, many raptors have hatching asynchrony. Flickers, most of the eggs hatch at the same time, and because they eat ants, there's tons of ants around. So usually no problem finding food. So both parents just go at it hard, but they almost always rear a fairly large number of young flickers.